Ladies and gentlemen, if you're not staying for the next session, could we please ask you to move out of the room so we can finish resetting for the next guys, please? Thank you.
Rufus? Should we get going? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jamie Drummond. I'm Executive Director and co-founder of an organisation called One. We campaign in partnership with the people of developing countries to help them achieve the Millennium Development Goals and much more beyond those. And a route to that is through transparency and accountability. And Rufus, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Rufus Pollock, a founder and CEO of the Open Knowledge Foundation. The Open Knowledge Foundation is a global network using technology and advocacy to unlock information, data, and knowledge and see it used to empower citizens and organizations to drive change around the world. And I mean, we're here today. It's kind of a real pleasure to be introducing this session on an area that we've now come together, One and OKF have come together to kind of kickstart. I think there's a lot of people in this room who've been interested in this area. And Jamie, I mean, I think your thoughts on why this is exciting.
So this morning, for example, the Prime Minister made a great announcement on public registers for the beneficial ownership of companies. That, as you imagine, is not a statement that just happened. There was a lot of people working very hard for a very long time to make sure that that became reality. There'll be a lot of people working very hard for a very long time to make sure it actually fundamentally means something by passing into actual law, then including trusts, then including making sure it includes overseas territories, then making sure it becomes law at the European level, then making sure it becomes law at G20 level. And this is just one particular subsector of the overall fight we're all part of for transparency and accountability and open government. Then there's the similar set of fights on extractives, the similar set of fights on budget, on open contracting, on aid transparency, and so on tax and transparency. This is a heck of a lot of work that we are all aware is a lot of work. And it's only all going to happen and end up actually turning resources into results for citizens if this is an amazingly well-organized movement. And you're all fantastic people. We're all looking forward to getting to know you better. It is not yet a fantastic movement. We've been part of great campaigns over the years, and we look forward to this group of issues and this group of organizations coming together and being even more effective as we all work together and coordinate together more as one. And I think that's what we're trying to do here through the Follow the Money partnership.
I think, for me, some of this starts from a story. So when we did a project, we started with a project in some of this area called Where Does My Money Go? Where does my money go? Several years ago, which was about showing citizens where did their tax money go when you paid taxes. But one of the challenges we constantly ran into was that it was very difficult. It was actually very difficult to start with, by the way, to say how much tax you actually paid. It's not an easy thing in most countries to say that. But furthermore, what people really want to know is where, they don't just want to know, hey, £5 billion ends up being in the health service in some general way, or £70 billion is spent on pensions. They want to know how much is spent on their pension, how much is spent on their street, repairing the street lights or repairing the road. They want to understand why or why not their school got built, or why there's a hospital bed, or why there isn't a hospital bed. And one of the things here is we've had incredible progress. I mean, it's reflecting today, but with EITI, IATI, we've seen these incredible flows and starting to see the availability of data in all these different areas. But what's the use, frankly, of knowing aid data? I mean, it's valuable of knowing aid flows to Uganda if we don't know how much the government then spends. How good is it to know how much Shell paid to Nigeria if we don't then know what the Nigerian used that money on in terms of building schools or building roads or these other infrastructure? Much of this information that we have been campaigning and others have been campaigning and doing an incredible job to get open up is not going to be valuable unless we connect it up. It's not going to be meaningful to citizens, it's not going to be meaningful to policymakers, it's not going to be meaningful to researchers, and it's not going to affect or drive change if we cannot connect it up. And I think the vision that we have of Follow the Money is of bringing together these streams, of crossing, Ghostbusters like crossing the streams, but having good outcomes from that. And that the excitement right now is because of the breakthroughs we've had over the last few years. We're in a position to actually think about that and how hard it's going to be. But that's really, I think, where the promised land lies in that. And there's going to be technical parts of that. There's the fact that we've had incredible work getting budgets opened up, but they're still today mostly locked in PDFs, sometimes in paper. And that's not, by the way, just developing countries. When we first campaigned for Where Does My Money Go here in the UK, we got given a stack of paper this high of budget information. There's no way we're going to connect it up if we're stuck in the world of paper and PDFs. There's no way we're going to connect it together if every different system has weirdly differing definitions of everything you might want to ask about. There's no way to connect up aid data with budget data because they use entirely different definitions. So that's why we also need to connect with the geeks, we need to connect with the policymakers, and we need to connect with the statistics agencies, and we need to connect with the countries on this. And I think this is a really exciting moment, and it's one where we're inviting you to come join us. One and OKF come together, but we know this is something of many people that we want to be talking with to drive the Follow the Money effort. So this is the beginning of something I think really interesting, and it's a real pleasure to be doing this.
Excellent. Let's get going. Cheers.
So thank you very much, Jamie and Rufus. You really got us going at a fairly high level. So my name is Robert Hunja. I work at the World Bank. There's some very sharp lights facing us here. I was just saying they should have warned us so that we can, kind of wear lipstick and comb our hair and be ready for the lights. So I'm very excited about this because, first of all, I want to just announce that we do, as the World Bank, really care about this for a whole host of reasons that I don't have the time to go into now. But just to announce that we are ready to join WAN and OKF in this effort and push it together and bring the support that we can, both from the knowledge side, but also our country networks and everything to make sure that this agenda is moved forward. So that's one reason I'm excited to be here. The other reason is that I'm chairing a panel of friends. These are people I know well. What I would like to do is just immediately get into their presentations, just so that we make sure that we get everything done within the time we have and we do not have too much time. I'll just very quickly introduce the presenters. Samba, to my right, is a great friend of mine from Nigeria. She works at the Public and Private Development Center. She's done some real work in a very interesting and exciting country called Nigeria. Justin Arenstein. You may not believe, but he's actually an African. He has also done some real and interesting work in that part of the world, and he's going to tell us a little bit about it. And Rocio Moreno is a friend of mine from DC. I was just telling her that we need to be meeting more in DC than in London. But she works at the Global Movement for Budget Transparency, Accountability, and Participation. Unlike me, who is just a talker about these things, these guys do actual real stuff. So we are lucky that we're going to hear from people who do actual real stuff. And we start with Samba. Yeah? Now, one of the things I've been charged to do is keep us to time. Mm-hmm. So please help me so that I don't have to apply any punitive measures.
Okay.
No. Just go ahead. But
okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be in your midst today. I've been introduced as Sember, and I work for an organization called the Public and Private Development Center. And within the Follow the Money campaign, or if you're looking at the budget cycle in Nigeria, which is public expenditure, we work in the area of procurement monitoring. So we train people to monitor public procurement processes. And our interest in that is because we believe that, and it is true, the fact is that any public expenditure that is supposed to provide the public good, work, or service has to pass through the public procurement process. And so it's most likely to be the process through which contracts are inflated, or, you don't get value for the money, and so there are no public services that are being delivered at the end of it. And that's where our interest lies. So in order to, we thought that rather than waiting for, the implementation of it, we want to make sure that people are competent, the people who are given the jobs actually have the skills that are required in every way, and that the contract is it's not inflated, the money is actually going to a service that the people need, it's prioritized. And we thought that we could, so it's like developing early warning signals to stop failure at the time of implementation. And so procurement comes within that part of, maybe budget advocacy and actually the project implementation. The process comes in the middle. And we wanted to close that link so that we can prevent project failures. I think we can just ditch the presentation, and I could just tell you what has worked in Nigeria so far. So in Nigeria, at the moment, when we first started monitoring public procurement or training people to monitor, I think it was very challenging, and most of the challenges that we had seen were around the fact that there was very little capacity to do it. So, we had this due process law, that's a public procurement law that was passed in 2007, and it's extremely technical, it's like going through the motions, and very few citizens knew about it. They have a statutory, there's a sunshine provision for citizens to actually monitor the process, but very little people knew about it. But now there's an increased number of people who know about it. But accessing information on the procurement process in a way that actually makes you report on those signals is still a very, very, very big problem. So it's been the challenge that has stifled monitoring the procurement process the most. So the information you may get it at the end of the award of the contract. So the contract has already started implementing. So it's like you're doing an audit rather than doing, that preventive thing that we wanted. What we have been able to do is to develop a portal online where people can submit reports from across the country on monitoring public procurement processes so that we can send it to the regulators rather than, because another problem we had noticed was that it was extremely, you would go and observe a process, but you don't report on it, or you keep your reports to yourself, so it doesn't actually feed into any mechanism that institutes change, so it was not very useful. So the portal is that kind of place where we can harness all of that, and we deployed that in 2009 at the first time, at the end of 2009 towards 2010. And since then, we've been making people, trying to get people to report. But something else that has happened, because people find it hard to access procurement information, is that I think the zeal of people to monitor, people are extremely frustrated. First of all, it's an extremely long process that could take months. But because you don't get information, I think procurement monitors are not, no one wants to keep going back to the ministry and trying to get information and all of that. So that has also stifled the process. And it points to the fact that, so the the portal, even though it's there, we have over maybe 300 reports. It's not enough. It's not what we had hoped for. We wanted much more information to be generated and also for the information to be made available, before the contract is awarded so that there can be some kind of intervention. But it hasn't worked that way. And so what we have realized is that, citizens are actually the drivers of the process. The technology only helps to enhance those things that you want. But if no one is using it, then, it doesn't really work. Well, so some things that we've done to try to solve these things is we have done some public interest litigation. Nigeria passed a Freedom of Information Act in 2011. So we have successfully closed 3 cases on accessing procurement information, and they have been enforced, and people have given us the information. But we wish we didn't have to go, that route. We wish we had been given the information before. Even though we're accessing our right to procurement information, we feel like we could have had that before. Something else we're doing is just, advocacy. When we make requests for information, if something we have noticed in the ministries, the public institutions, is that they rely on confidentiality, and I think it's something most people are familiar with, not to release information. They say commercial secrets and all of that thing. So what we have been doing also is to use that as a point of advocacy, to write back to them and say, well, that's not absolute. This is what the law says, and it has worked in some instances, and it's something that we still keep doing. But something that I think needs to be done, and I think Sheun, my friend, would agree with me, is that we need to, I think what the Follow the Money campaign can do in Nigeria is to just integrate efforts of people who are doing work on revenue generation, transparency in the revenues, to the people who are doing procurement monitoring and to the people who are doing the implementation of the monitoring, because that's the loop that we're trying to close. And I think it's very important that organizations that support such efforts think about various people working in that are doing these things, so that that integration, I think it would help us much more than it's helping us now. So that's something that we can do. I always think about when I see the infographics that Budget produces on trying to explain the budget, it would be nice if we can have those kinds of things also on, the procurement process, so people don't see it as something that is just technical, or just, but see how it relates to them and, the social delivery of public services. So I think I've covered the scope, yeah?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Semba, that's great. You've done very well, including on time, so that we have an opportunity to have a conversation. What I did not mention about Justin is that he works at the African Media Initiative, a game changer in this business, and he's going to tell us a little bit about what he's been doing. So, Justin.
So I brought some slides just so you can see what I'm talking about, so that it's not going to be a slavish kind of read-through of the slides. So I'm with the African Media Initiative. It's a association of kind of dinosaur legacy media. It's not donor funded. It's newspapers, about 600 companies across Africa, and they're thinking about their future. And they're not thinking about this necessarily as something that they want to be altruistic about, or that we need to get data out there to do social good. It's about how can we put data out there that people can use to change their lives. So I want to just very quickly tell you 2 quick stories about how we're doing that in the Follow the Money field. I think firstly it's important to recognize that Follow the Money is not a new concept. It's something that journalists have been doing for at least 100 years as one of the core kind of precepts of our craft. This is a very poor village in Azerbaijan in New Europe, or on the very edges of Europe at least. And as you can see, incredibly poor. That small little picture in the corner with a white bucket and a tube of water dripping into it was at one stage the only fresh water or potable water that this village was able to get. And when a local journalist by the name of Khadija went out there and asked the community, what is the root of this problem? Their only explanation was that it's the English, the Ingles. They're mining, they've got a mine, and they've stolen our water. So she started probing and digging, and she started following the money. And eventually, through going through Panama and following contracts and shareholders of companies and scraping beneficial ownerships, it looped all the way back, and a very complicated infographic that is not kind of best practice, but it looped back to those 2 women, very glamorous women that you see on the screen. They're the daughters of the president. of Azerbaijan. And effectively, they had a series of front companies registered in offshore territories, including an English company at one stage, that masked their beneficial ownership of this mining contract that had been awarded to them by their father. His signature was on the grant of the concession for the gold mine. So that's just a very quick example of how follow the money and actually physically following it across territories, because it's never constrained to one geography, can impact on poor people's lives and change at least their ability to engage in an evidence-based discussion. You're not necessarily going to change their reality, but you're going to give them the tools at least that they can start asking informed questions. That investigation was done by the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, which is a member of a global network that works alongside some of our programs, and we build follow-the-money tools, data-driven as well as forensic-driven tools. The second story that I want to mention is far smaller scale. That first project involved journalists in multiple countries and took a very long time, as well as donor funding to do. The second one is a very simple project that was built in a day and a half and then elaborated on over a couple of additional days in Ghana. And it also looks at extractive companies, and it scrapes data, not this time because of criminal kind of misbehavior, but information that was not available to ordinary villagers who are entitled to 3% of the royalties that any extractive company generates off minerals that is mined from under their land. And that money is supposed to come back to local communities so that they can build local infrastructure. The money was not flowing. The minerals were leaving, but no benefits were accruing to local communities. When communities asked government, where is this money? Government would shrug its shoulders and say the mining companies are not paying it across. Ask the mining companies and they say we are paying it across. Government is not dispersing it. So no one could get to the root of it. In a day and a half, one coder, or a hacktivist, a kind of activist developer, and a journalist and a community activist went to Securities Exchange Commission in the US, stock exchanges in Canada, South Africa, and Australia. They scraped the annual reports of various companies, and they found the reports of where money had been paid across and how much money had been paid across. And then were able to go to government and challenge them and say, you have received exact amounts of money. On the back of that, they built a very simple SMS and website service that you can input your village or your region, and it tells you exactly how much money is due to your community. And then going into government budgets, what government has theoretically done with that money in capital expense. This is a project, a prototype that's being rolled out at the moment, but the point is that a lot of the times that we work with follow the money activists, we're talking about large, high-level campaigns. Very seldom are we thinking about how can this information change the lives of ordinary citizens? How can we empower them to do something about whatever it is that ails them, rather than having a large organization swoop in from outside to solve their problems? So how do we do that? Here's some of the tools that we've built, and some of them predate the kind of open data movement. This is something called the Investigative Dashboard, which has just been relaunched in the second iteration. And effectively what it does is, it does a lot of what Open Corporates does. It pulls together ownership across the world of companies, but it goes one step further, and we scrape and reconstruct company indexes where they don't exist or where governments don't give us access to them. How do we do that? We take Hansard and we take government gazette reports, we make them machine readable, we extract entities out of them, and then laboriously reconstruct what a register should look like, and put it out there and then say, government, is this right or not? So effectively creating data where it doesn't exist or liberating it from dead wood. It's now been used all over the world. It's led to award-winning journalism by everyone from large organizations like The Guardian and elsewhere through to small local-based media across the world. The secret is not the data or the technology. The secret is that behind this, there's a desk and a few desks of expert human researchers who help join the dots. Secondly, we're taking all that information that is locked up in paper and PDFs, and we're digitizing them in newsrooms, universities, and libraries and elsewhere, where research has accumulated, including at NGOs, has accumulated and sits on shelves and no one does anything about it. We're putting it into an effective, almost Library of Congress kind of repository. And again, we're creating linked data out of the entity in those documents. So a mention in a court case in Mauritius about money laundering suddenly gets linked to a mining company in the DRC, in the Congo, and you can start joining the dots across geographies and across borders. It's available, again, open source, using open source software, in this case, Document Cloud, and a couple of bolt-ons that we've built on top of that. But tools and information alone are meaningless unless you have people that use it and deploy it at grassroots level. So we're building networks of both coders and hacktivists, as well as journalists across the continent. And in Africa at the moment, we've got 14 of these Hacks and Hackers chapters. They meet on a monthly basis. They're very different from their originator in the US, where people get together to talk about creating the next Facebook and Twitter and startup. In Africa, it's about how do we just survive and how do we track down whoever the target is of our next story. And again, it's largely about liberating and making sense of a lot of information. And then we've linked them with investigative newsrooms, our versions of ProPublicas, invariably nowhere near as well funded, but doing just as important work, so that they suddenly have external R&D teams that can help them follow the money. And then we bring people together and we get them to co-create solutions. Not stepping across that line of being a journalist one day and an advocate the next, but finding the synergies where suddenly researchers and community grassroots movement organizations can bring information and context to an investigation that would not otherwise be possible, and vice versa, giving people actionable info that they can use to shape decisions and campaigns on. And finally, something that we've just started doing is then embedding into all these tech incubators you see popping up all over the place, creating and finding a corner in each of them to create citizen labs, places where ordinary people can actually come and say, I'm not trying to reinvent Facebook. I'm trying to just solve the facts of clean water in my village, or where did the mining money go, for example, and find people who can help them build solutions or find solutions to those problems. So how do we do that? We've got 3 principles that we focus on across all our programs. Firstly, they've got to be demand-driven. So if it's a follow the money campaign, that's great. We do need high-level policy engagement to free up some and change law and regulation. At the same time, we need to be certain that it doesn't lose a connection with real people and real impacts on the grounds. A lot of the RTI movement did that initially at some times, where they would be liberating information, they'd be putting access to information laws in place, and then no one uses them. Why? Because they've potentially forgot the first principle of what did people really need this for, and stay true to that goal and focus. Secondly, we try and ensure that they're outcomes-based. And then I think there's a slide that I've actually somehow deleted. I don't know how to go backwards. But anyhow, the slide that I think is missing there is that it needs to be citizen-focused and demand-driven. So the citizen-focused bit is that you need to go and find real people. They cannot be policy tsars. They cannot be politicians. You need to have almost a man in a blue overall to kind of dumb it down to that expression, standing in the corner of any of these discussions to say, how do we keep this real? Not just that we're responding to real needs that we know people need to solve, but how do we ensure that those needs are connected to people's realities as well? And then secondly, how do we ensure that any of the things that we do try and intervene with result in real kind of tangible outcomes? The organizations that we work with primarily on our follow the money work is something called ANSIR, the African Network of Centers for Investigative Reporting. There are about 18 of these newsrooms that are investigative newsrooms across the continent, and they're a hybrid of some purely commercial that have been around for 15 years, predating the fad that's you're seeing in Europe and the States at the moment. And then you get some of the more kind of NGO-driven ones in some of the more marginal economies as well. So if you want to collaborate with us, we're dead keen. We're sitting on lots of information. And more importantly, we often are at the front end of where a lot of these companies that you're trying to track, where their activities are happening, at least in Africa. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Justin. I knew that Justin was involved in some exciting work in the frontiers, but it's really great to see the breadth and scope of this, and hopefully we'll get a chance to chat a little bit. Our third presenter is Rocio Moreno, who I already introduced, so I'll just ask her to go ahead.
Thank you, Robert. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rocio Moreno. I am the coordinator of the Global Movement for Budget Transparency, Accountability, and Participation. It's a bit long, but for short, you can call us BTAP. At the moment, BTAP is it's growing. We have around 153 signatory organizations, out of which 143 are national organizations. All of our members have been working on budget issues and public policies for at least 5 to 10 years. So vast experience has been acquired, and most of them have a good track record. And I say most of them because some of them work in very difficult contexts, and that's something that I will get to in a moment. When they asked me to talk about this panel about the Follow the Money Network, I thought that there were some things that needed to be highlighted. I mean, I am representing a couple of organizations worldwide, so for me it's pretty important to bring out here some of the lessons that they've learned and some of the challenges that they've experienced. And overall, we have a bigger challenge, which is why we came and joined this movement called BTAP. So some of the things that I'm going to be touching upon might be a little bit obvious, but I guess in order to build and to have an initial assessment of where we're standing and how we can actually move forward and actually construct a solid initiative like the ones that we're talking about right now, I think that we just need to put it on the floor. So just to begin, let me begin by saying that although that we've been talking about follow the money, I think that it's important to highlight that when we're talking about resources, when we're talking about the budget agenda, we're not only talking about expenditures, it's actually talking about the broader agenda, which brings together the revenue and the expenditure side. So that encompasses extractive revenues, aid, the tax agenda, etc. It's important to highlight this because most of the organizations with whom that are part of the BTAP movement are actually working in this broader perspective. It's not only about monitoring where the end of the resources, where the final allocation of resources are going to, but since the origin and where the resources are coming from and how they're being allocated. So that said, most of the organizations have come to the knowledge that although information is essential and it is crucial to have it out there, it is not enough to translate information into accountability. And it's not enough also to mobilize people. I think that my previous colleagues here in the panel have also stated that same argument. For us, some of the reasons are that, to begin, budgets might not be as sexy as we would like them to be. Budgets are still seen as something very technical. And for this reason, civil society organizations in the national countries have had to undertake numerous additional efforts by those undertaken by the government in just providing information to actually helping them in disseminate the information, in translate that information into something that is more digestible, if we can say it like that. In addition, another lesson learned is that in order to actually advance and transform public policies or advance the budget agenda overall, which can include reallocating budgets or improving budget transparency in general, you need a lot of time to actually do that. You need sustained efforts and you need quite some time to get organizations to push the agenda, and when they actually achieve an outcome, a positive outcome, they need to continue working to maintain that outcome and to continue pushing for the rest of the these are just, let me just make this simpler. It's just an initial milestone which can then lead to greater progress. And then the next agenda is that if we are looking that by, from our organization's point of view, that if they actually want to continue working on budget issues, and we've already established that they need quite some time to transform and push the agenda, they also have funding issues. Funding in the national context could be, is still something complicated, and that's something that also needs to be taken into consideration. So despite all these lessons and challenges that national organizations face, they have been able to overcome most of these challenges, and we have seen positive outcomes being undertaken. We've seen many countries advancing substantially in budget transparency, substantially in creating and strengthening mechanisms that will improve public policy and eventually will start translating into improvement in people's lives. I always like to use the futuristic tense of the verb because it's very difficult to see the actual outcomes when you're working with public policy. It takes some time to actually see the improvements when it comes to people. But just to be very clear, the challenge is in the national space. That is where the fight has to be taken. But there also is a great opportunity, and that is how do we link all these efforts that are being taken in the national space and take those to the international agenda. There is a lot of information and a lot of expertise that has already been concentrated in the countries by the organizations that are working on these issues, who have already been able to create local coalitions and are being able to push the agenda and establish good and solid relations in some cases with government and in others with other allies like the parliaments or journalists who are helping them to advance this agenda. I am starting to talk about this because at the moment it would seem that that budgets can only be undertaken, the budget agenda can only be advanced in the national context, but that's not true. There are a lot of initiatives like this one that are being undertaken in the international arena. We have organizations, for example, like the World Bank that does an extraordinary job to also push the agenda, but there are also some decisions that are being made in the international space. So for us as BTAB, when we came together, the main purpose was how can we open up these spaces? How can we actually create bridges between the work that our organizations are doing in the national level and give them an opportunity to express their voice and to use that expertise that they've been acquiring and feed international discussions. So for us as BTAP, it was really important to get this information out there because we see that there are all these challenges in the international level which are not necessarily being touched upon. It is important to acknowledge that we can actually transform the theory of change and shift it into a new theory in which not only transformation is possible in the national context, but it can also be done at the same time in the international level. We also need to begin acknowledging what I mentioned at the beginning, that the budget agenda needs to encompass absolutely everything that has to do with the money, and that includes extractives, includes aids, that includes tax. And we need to highlight this because currently in the international agenda, it would seem like the budget agenda is undermined because of these sector-specific campaigns that are being undertaken, and which is not bad. But we need to acknowledge that the bigger umbrella that would allow us to advance all these specific sector-wise agendas is budget transparency as a whole. And in addition, for me, and I would like to end with this, is so when we're talking about these initiatives, like the Follow the Money network that we're currently talking about, is how can we actually guarantee that in these initiatives we're actually opening up spaces for civil society organizations? And how can we guarantee or use these initiatives to open up spaces for civil society organizations that are on the ground, that have vast experience in working in those contexts with a certain kind of governments and under very difficult conditions, and that can actually become very beneficial to advance our agenda faster? So I would leave it there.
Thank you very much, Rocio. I'm going to ask the permission of the group to do two things. One is, if you don't mind, I promise that we'll have some time for a conversation, but I thought it might be useful to just hear from the respondents before we have a break. And then once we've done that, we'll open up and have a real conversation. Secondly, just because of the size of the podium, we may have to do a shift and ask Martin and Olusegun to come up front, and then we'll see how we can improve. You want to do it from there? Okay, that's fine. Okay, that's great. Excellent.
Thanks, Robert. So, follow the money. What is it, and why is it exciting? Ultimately, I think what following the money is taking revenue from its source and then seeing if it does one of two things. Either is it actually turned into expenditures and delivers results, which is partly what the One campaign calls from resources to results, or is it generated and then squirreled away into someone's bank account in a remote location, perhaps on a Caribbean island? That's why it matters, and I think we've heard great examples from the different panelists. So why am I excited about it in addition to that? As a funder in this space, one of the great luxuries of being a funder is that we can try and bring different communities together. And what we try and do, an open government partnership is a testament to that, the testimony to that, is to try and build an open government movement. And I worry, and this was mentioned by the panelists, and I worry as to the degree to which we become quite siloed in our specific, quite geeky sector of expertise. And I'm guilty of that like anyone. I used to be very focused on aid transparency, and so you spend your life focusing on aid transparency, on extractors, on tax, etc. So what the follow the money work gives us the opportunity of is to really draw a line between these different initiatives and bring them together. It's like a chapeau, it's like a bridge. That's the first thing. Then I want to nail and narrow down very specifically an opportunity that came out, I think, in Justin's intervention specifically, which is how we can bring together the open data and the fiscal transparency and accountability communities, which sounds obvious, but isn't. And I see a few people smiling in the room. Now, why it matters, I won't repeat what you said. I'll just quote Chris Taggart, who may not be in the room, which is talking about contract transparency. If you have a few hundred contracts, and it's true that the follow the money space is 100 years old, and if you have a few hundred contracts, 100 years old, you can have a cup of coffee, read through them over the weekend, and then, write a paper, write a piece, be an investigative journalist, a muckraker in the early 20th century. But at this point, if we really want contract transparency on a global scale, we're not talking about a few hundred contracts, we're talking about hundreds of thousands or millions of contracts. And if we're talking about millions of contracts, we have a data problem. It's not something we can just do, a cup of coffee. Now, 2 quick points to finish, which is that some of you in the room were at this meeting. We organized a meeting in July in Washington, D.C. to bring the open data community together with the different follow the money communities, extractives, tax, aid, budgets, and others. It is striking at this point still the degree to which the communities have relatively little understanding of one another. And I find that particularly interesting, considering that in this very room number 6, the meeting beforehand, the session beforehand, was the launch of the Open Data Working Group. And we need to do a lot more work to bring these different communities together. Why does this matter, and why is it less obvious than it seems? And here I'll quote, I'll just do a lot of quotes today. Here I'll quote Beth Novak, who said a couple of times over the past few days, and I think it's true, that in the 1,500 people we have in this building, we have roughly 2 communities. They're not mutually exclusive and they need to work together, but they are different. And there's a community that focuses more on accountability, and that's mostly what we've heard about just now. And there's a community that looks at leveraging the resources that are within government. And that's broadly, I'm simplifying, but it is broadly what the open data community is focused on. And bringing those together, I think, is key for the reason I mentioned earlier, but isn't obvious. And this is something we really need your minds to work on with us. So just to finish, bringing them together, what does it mean? It means information in open formats, and we've talked about machine readability, and PDFs are bad, and that's fine, and that's a relatively, I would say, easy side of the fight. The much harder one is comparability. It's interoperability. It's actually the quite boring stuff of looking at codifications, learning lessons from the International Aid Transparency Initiative, and seeing how the data links up. And then again, to quote Tim Berners-Lee from the session previous to this one, linking is everything, right? It's linking that makes it interesting. It's linking that makes it interesting for an investigative journalist or for a kid or for pretty much anyone. Why? Because what you want to link is who is the owner. So Prime Minister Cameron was talking about beneficial ownership. Who is the owner of that company in that tax haven? Is he an MP? He's an MP from which district? Then geographical data starts becoming important. And in that district, education funds have gone missing. That's why linking is important. That's why open data is important. And that's why bringing those communities together is key. And we need everyone's help to do that. Thank you.
So our final speaker and respondent is Olusegun, who will tell us a little bit about work that is going on, budget IT in Nigeria.
Yeah, I guess Martin didn't need to introduce himself, but I will do. My name is Olusegun Onigbide. I work with Budget in Nigeria. Budget is a startup. We began in 2011. When we began, it was about making data more interesting, more accessible, more transparent, more fun for people to understand. I learned when the beta person was speaking about how data could be very boring, and which one could be much more boring is the budget, because it's very interesting for policymakers to wrap it in a riddle and make it more difficult for people to understand. So I was in the bank for a long period of time, and I decided to say, rather than do the analytics for the bank, let me try and do it for the public. And we had early support from my founder, Indigo Trust. People really believed in us and still carrying us on. I'll be responding to the questions. And my first point is, understand, is where Martin stopped, which about we need linkages because the problem is systemic. Systemic meaning we can't just start biting it at different places. We have to work on a concerted effort together and say, okay, this is how we're going to solve this problem. I've worked strongly on the budget for a long period of time, and for 2 years, and Symbia has been on the procurement end. And like you'll find out that no matter how much you want to chuckle about where you get excited about doing the budget in infographics and interactive applications like we do, there's still the end where the corruption really comes in, which is the procurement end. So the question is, how do we now bring that synergy together? And I think that is the point which comes about following the money. Following the money is understanding that this is a whole long pipe, and maybe it could start with the budget, it could start go on with the procurement, and then it becomes and it comes out with the service delivery, then it comes out with the accountability, it comes out measuring the indexes for efficiency. If it comes from the revenue end, we'll say, okay, we're coming from aid, we're coming from taxes, we're coming from extractives. And looking at this entire cycle or this entire chain, how do we ensure that we are all working up together and being on the same page? So I'm really excited about this. But one thing I want to go for is citizen engagement from this point. We are going to follow the money. We're going to ensure that we find the data out there. We're going to ensure that we ask the questions. We're going to ensure that we build an open data culture where we need to build. And where we find lack of open data culture, maybe we use tools like the FOI. But the question is, how do we ensure that we stop being in what I call an echo chamber, that we expand this narrative to more people and more people within the society? Because one thing I find in Nigeria is this. We need to, like what making our voices count, very apt theme. We need to amplify the voices. Getting civil society to talk about it in a very small space might not be enough. We need to ensure that we drive down the narrative, down the literacy chain, ensure that everybody's on the same page about this. And that's why whatever we're going to build about follow the money, we should understand that citizen engagement, civic discussion about these things are also very key, so that we can ensure that government gets to listen. If it's a civil society issue alone, it might end up being a press release, and then the news cycle takes it as a tide, and it goes on and on and on. But if it's something in which the people care about, we're engaging them and building their interest into it, definitely it's an issue that will stay and move on. The last one I will talk about is build structures. Finally, being followed the money, maybe we have to also get an institutional component into these things and begin to show best examples to the world. We need to find the best examples and amplify them very well. Structures, what I mean by institutional structure is things as trust is going to be key, things as the laws, the legislations are going to be very key in getting all these things. And we need to start defining that right now. So what is the kind of legislation that will get us the beneficial ownership? What are the kind of things that would get us data about the procurement process? What are the kind of data that would get us about aid information? So do we need to start talking to the World Bank and say, give us the data about aid, make it more interesting, make it more open? Do we need to start talking to the tax companies and say, this is how we want to get tax information? So we need to identify where are the data points. We need to identify which structures, which connections, which discussions we bring out this data out. So that when we do that, we can also, we have built up a unified system where we can now basically now start following up the money. That basically is my own point. I will just make the last example with Nigerian as a simple case. Nigeria is publishes its budget, meaning budget is always online, and the budget office.gov.ng. But one thing Nigeria would find it difficult to publish is the spending data, which is what ties into the procurement. Getting that data in bulk is going to be a big problem. So you have people like the PPDC, I respect their courage and their guts going to every government office and saying, for every piece of contract, can you just show me the documentation? Can you show me the procurement process? And at the end of the day, it gets to court and gets to legislations. But one of the things which might be very interesting is, how do we ensure that the way we have the budget data out in bulk, then you get the procurement and the spending data out in bulk, then easily we can begin to tie the loose ends together and build a variable structure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Olusegun, for making it real. Thank you very much for that. I believe we have some time to have a conversation, but I thought we could do two things. One is, I'm sure we have some mics. Yeah. Oh, so we have mics around. So please, when you ask your question or make a comment, it doesn't always have to be a question. You're encouraged to contribute to the debate, but I would ask you to kindly, just very quickly introduce yourself, who you are, where you work, and then please be brief and succinct, just so that we can get to hear as many voices as possible. So we start with the lady there on the left. And then there's another lady there in the middle and a lady on the right. Excellent. So let's do that.
Hi, thank you. I'm Isabel Munilla. I work for Oxfam America, and I was going to direct my question to the two ladies on the panel. I was in DC and did an Open Knowledge Foundation data expedition on Nigerian procurement data, and it was really interesting. And my question for you is, what was interesting about it is that we were giving a piece of data, we didn't know what it was, and we were just sent to look through it and see what we could get out of it. My question for you is, from my perspective, I'm a legislative and policy change campaigner. I'm also interested in what happens with communities on the ground, of course, but my job is to really try to change legislation. How do you see this type of work, looking at individual data sets that are looking at individual problems, maybe with project procurement issues, or even at the budget at the larger national budget level? How do you see that type of analysis, that type of transparency, then being rolled up into campaigns that work on legislation? Because from my perspective, if we're dealing with systemic issues, how can we gather all this information about problems in individual projects to then roll up into maybe a national campaign that tries to change procurement policy, for example?
So let's take these three and then we'll get, I think there was a lady here who had, yeah? Yes.
There it is, thank you. Hi, my name is Heather Lowe. I'm with Global Financial Integrity. We're a Washington, D.C. based think tank. We're best known for our efforts to quantify illicit capital flight from developing countries, which we've estimated to be about $900 billion per year, and that's a very conservative estimate based on the data that we're looking at. The data that we're looking at is World Bank IMF data in doing that analysis, and Bank of International Settlement data. What we'd really like to know is where that money goes. We'd like to follow that money. We'd like to see where it's absorbed around the world. The data that we need to do that is collected by the IMF and the World Bank, but it is not available to us. We'd like to be able to do that study. I'm here asking for that data to be made available so that it can be analyzed. Thank you.
I'm Lisa Misol from Human Rights Watch, And we heard from our last speaker about how courageous it is to confront local officials with these things. And Justin presented the case in Azerbaijan of the gold mine that the presidential family had a link to. Well, actually, one of the co-authors of that investigative article suffered some pretty severe consequences, including a smear campaign, a release of a video recorded from a secret video recorded in her home with her boyfriend, and it's gone on from there. So this highlights the problem of the need for freedom of expression, various human rights, respect for human rights, and Azerbaijan is in OGP. OGP has some human rights provisions. This is really just a comment to say that following the money is essential to make sure that public funds actually serve the public. In order to make that work, we need to have respect for fundamental human rights, and I really want to see OGP take that up strongly within its membership. Thank you.
I believe we can take 2 more questions or comments for 1, 2, then there's a gentleman in that. Yes.
Thank you. I'm Danang. I'm from Indonesia Corruption Watch. I want to ask Justin about how do you track the companies, particularly the family companies that are not listed in the financial the stock market. The problem for us in Asia, probably particularly in Indonesia, that usually the beneficial owner are family company. So in the established public company, it is only a vehicle to get money from the financial market. So in the end, it will be a family company. So that's why the problem is hard to track who are the beneficial owners. And what happened in Indonesia, sometimes, the companies probably, located in Singapore or Hong Kong or other places in the world. And secondly, I want to know further about the speaker experience in Africa. How about the audit report by Supreme Audit Agency, with the audit released to the public, and how about the quality of the audit report, whether it can show how the government used the money, or how the official make a fraud or probably indication of corruption in the audit report. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Elena Hofbauer. I'm with the International Budget Partnership in Mexico. And my main question to the panel is, how do you actually think that you will break down these silos? I'm intrigued because I feel very connected and can relate very easily to the work that happens at the country level, and that is where our partners work most of the time, at the subnational, country, provincial, whatever, in whatever kinds of topics. And I see that it is important at the country level to be able to see how the money that is generated through extractives goes back into education or health or in building wells or in getting water. And there it seems very obvious that the different groups working on different topics should be working together to achieve that. How from the international level you will actually drill down to the vast environment of groups working on different issues at the country level or below, subnational. When I say country, I don't mean national. That I find mind-boggling, to say the least, because, it is something that for us has been extremely difficult, and, all of the work of the IBP comes out of the groups working on the ground. So how, as international initiatives, will you reach down there and make sure that there the connection is made? So that is one question. The second is that certainly, I think that we have to be very, very vigorous in pushing forward the role that the people in the front line is playing in this. I mean, as my colleague back here was saying, I mean, the work that you talked about, which took years, had some severe consequences for real people. And these severe consequences normally are only faced in the field. And how to make sure that any international effort actually takes that into account, but also protects and helps the struggles that are happening on the front lines. I would also like to know what you think about that, what your plans are about that.
All right, a very good first round of questions, comments, recommendations, and requests for information and data. I'll ask, actually, Rufus and Jamie, if you want to say something, please do so. I don't think we don't feel under the obligation to answer each and every question, but if there's something very specific that was posed to you, that would be nice to do that. Do you want to start? Do you want to go first, Jamie?
Well, there's a very large number. I mean, I think two good things were there were two specific requests already for things that one could be asking for that would enable us to better follow the money. And I think that's one of them. So particularly ones which involve cross-cutting in some way, that involve connecting end to end. I mean, I want to leave several other questions. I think on the other side is a kind of humility. I mean, I think one idea here, you asked like what role or how it could relate. I mean, one thing is that, I mean, IBP and the initiatives that have already happened, I think one connection at the moment that I see is just embedding into some of those the incredible work they've already done, but some of the things we've discussed again. Martin, I think, made the point, which is, is machine readability, there's an ask to have the budget, is there an ask to have machine readable open data? And the reason about that is not because we're obsessed about open data, which in some sense is completely irrelevant. It's because it enables us to more rapidly make those connections. And the hope is one day, a lot of the time I don't know, the example Justin gave, I can imagine there's a lot of paper trail following. There's a lot of reading documents. I know, talking with groups like Global Witness, the incredible amount of, often, hard copy stuff, finding, bank numbers written on the backs of pieces of paper. That will still happen, but it's not going to scale if that's what we're at. We're not going to be able to make these connections. I think that's one point where there's a connection here is some of these ideas of open data, of machine readability, and of connecting across is something that can be offered. These things will be embedded into what's already going on. I mean, again, someone else from EITI and Publish What You Pay said, well, it's actually, I kick myself now to saying we've done an amazing job, but I wish I'd known more about open data because I'd written more of this into some of the things we were asking for. Not because I care about open data, because it would make our job of then actually following the money that much easier. And I think those are some of the things that the connection, and I think, to finish, totally agree, this is not some international, the international must go down to the local very much so. In the same way that IBP is the International Budget Partnership, but it doesn't mean it actually operates the international level, it's very much at the local level.
Maybe one sort of quick way of trying to, I think your question's excellent, about the how to de-silo and really what that will take. And I think the honest answer is we don't know. The theory, the hypothesis is that with all these open data standards, linking up these different data sets that are increasingly open, to Martin's point, big data will come along and help a lot. And if you know how to fish in there properly, you as a campaigner in a specific area will be able to track down something that you think went missing and then find somewhere in the British Virgin Islands where that money pops up again. And hey presto, we've got a much more elegant system. We're probably going to have some good anecdotes like that for a while. It's going to be a long time before that's normal. And it's going to take a lot of work. I mean, my point at the beginning was that this is only going to be just a ton of work, and each of those examples you gave were all amazing and great examples of why this is worth doing. But enormous amounts of work. And I think one appeal I'd have is this is a relatively small community right now. This is not yet the movement it needs to be. We've seen a few movements, campaigns go from the margins to mainstream over the last 10, 15, 20 years. And what happens, an anthropologist studying that will see, suddenly a group of people who really care about something obscure like open data suddenly get their moment in prime time, in sunlight, and you see them blinking as they come out from the cave of specialism they've been in. And it's a wonderful period, and it's a great moment, and it's very enlightening. It's also quite confusing, and I think that's sort of what's happening, is what we're seeing happen. And they're coming out of all of their caves simultaneously, if you don't mind my saying so. You're gathering in the sun, it's a fertile moment. And in that moment of gathering, and it's been going on for it doesn't just happen today. It's the work of many people trying to gather these different tribes, but you sort of can feel that that's what's happening. It's very exciting, but it needs quickly to figure out a better language to get more people involved and to despecialize some aspects of it. I think the work that, for example, your budget does in helping explain the Nigerian budget is amazing work. And I know Tanzania, you got Zito just behind you, Zito Kabwe, a great Tanzanian parliamentarian. Do you have anything like that in Tanzania? Huh? Okay, very good. Okay, well, I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know that. But that's what we need more of, and that's what's going to work, and that's what's going to build a movement. It's when the people at subnational municipal level are linking with national level campaigns, and then, when, for example, President Kikwete or Goodluck turn up at some global conference, Cameron's nudging them in the elbow about something, and they're nudging him in the elbow about something. We'll see that kind of jostling, so that there's national progress, there's subnational progress, and there's at these multilateral fora, moving along together. And that's what we need an acceleration of. There might be an opportunity for, in the next 2 years, a bit of a step change in that the new Millennium Goals are a way of disciplining and holding accountable the whole messy development community, because it has a moment of accountability coming up at the end of 2015. A lot of discussion about the new Millennium Goals and what should replace these for 2016 and beyond. And it behooves everyone to pay more attention to the data with which we're measuring progress than the development community is used to. There is a slight addiction to slightly dodgy data sets that's been going on. And I think that's something that could shake things up in the next couple of years as well and help de-silo things.
Okay, I'll ask the members of the panel to just react to one thing so that we have a second round of conversations.
So I had a couple of questions that were asked. Should I answer them?
If you can, quickly.
Cool. So just very quickly, just responding firstly to Martin about those two communities that you're saying bringing together. There's one missing, and those are the guys who specialize in engagement, the media. And the media, by the open data and open government movement, have been treating the media as an intermediary, and as a result, you're going to be getting a bill for advertising as opposed to partners who are going to be pushing the message. So I think we need to also pull in people who tell those stories. And they're a mobilization agent, so their job is to actually connect with large audiences, explain the complicated in a way that people can understand, and then help people make decisions with that information. So standards are important, and we heard a lot of people saying, how do we break down these silos? Standards are important, and bringing communities together. But I think the principle that we need to repush is not a new one, it's reuse. We need to get people reusing each other's data and each other's resources. So the moment that starts happening, we start getting self-interest, binding these communities together and building bridges across the silos. Some of the quick questions that were asked were, how do we change the systemic problems international campaigns? Make it personal. If you use that data so that ordinary citizens can understand how it's hitting them in the pockets or how it's impacting on their inability to get clean water or healthcare, they're suddenly going to start doing something about it, as opposed to just being a lobbyist-driven campaign. So we need to make it real to people, and data allows us to do that in many ways. The Azerbaijan thing with Khadija, I mean, that was horrific. They spied on her, broadcast effective sex tapes, and tried to use that to blackmail her. And there have been incidents of break-ins and other kinds of abuses. The only way that she was able to stand up to that intimidation was because we've broken down some of the silos in the media. So she's part of a global network where suddenly African, Latin American, Southeast Asian media organizations and journalists were very quickly on the case. And the principle there is that you take out a journalist, we'll send 10 more in to finish that job, if necessary. So you disincentivize harming or jailing journalists. It doesn't always work, but it's worked in places like the DRC, for example, and in this specific case as well. And it's maybe a principle we can use with following the money, because you're going to run into problems. You're going to run into organized crime very, very quickly, and they don't play by the rules that we do. In terms of unlisted companies, how do we track them? So there's always a record somewhere, and invariably the place that we mine very profitably are court records. So in addition to digitizing company registrars, we're digitizing court records wherever we can get hold of them, because there's always a fallout amongst thieves, and invariably they drag each other to court to fight about it, and in that testimony the linkages and the beneficial owners become apparent. So we digitize those and we extract the entities using things like Document Cloud, which is free software available, and then start mapping those relationships. We also, things like looking at whose auditors and whose accountants are shared between entities. You don't trust people with kind of your business secrets unless they're part of the family. So invariably there's a web of companies, but they'll all have a single auditor or a single accountant. So you start looking for some of those commonalities. About 4 years ago, we published a book called, ironically, Follow the Money, which is available online free of charge from the ICFJ. And it kind of details about 30 or 40 pages of these kinds of tricks of the trade that are easy for you to replicate. And then how do we connect across silos? The thing that we're trying to do is appeal to people's selfishness and self-interest and create a marketplace where it's in people's own interests to collaborate and share information. And by doing that, you don't have to incentivize them with money or with grants or campaign them, because that's just a hit and run. To almost make people aware of things. It's very difficult to sustain usage that way. Yeah, that was about it.
No, I just wanted to pretty much focus on Isabel's question on the on how to roll up transparency problems to a national campaign. I mean, that's kind of a little bit like the $1 million question. I mean, if we can actually get a good campaign to run in the national level, we could definitely work on the demand side. We could definitely engage more citizens and broaden the users of budget information who are currently focused only on CSOs, experts, academics, etc. I mean, and I do think that that's an excellent role for INGOs. I mean, you have one campaign who are excellent in doing campaigns worldwide. I do think that there's a lot of expertise out there that could be used to actually tap into personalized campaigns, as Justin was saying. I mean, if we can actually link budgets to a specific needs of people, then maybe we can start getting more people involved in using that information. And that's not happening right now. Yeah, I think that that's one of the major limitations also of CSOs, to be very honest. I think that they're very good advocates, they're good strategizing, but that's not the same thing as doing a campaign. So that's something that we should definitely think more about.
Summer, you had a question.
Well, yeah, just, I think it's still yours. And just on that point, I think in Nigeria, I think it's been a little different because we actually do have the laws in place. The reforms for the laws took place first. So in the past decade, we've had the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, the Independence and Corrupt Practices, and related offenses. We've had the Public Procurement Act. We've had the Fiscal Responsibility Act. We've had the Extractives Industry Transparency Act. And all of this happened between 2004 and to date. We have the Freedom of Information Law. So we have a myriad of things that are progressive, they are reform laws, and so it's in the implementation, the knowledge of it, and the right that it gives you, and also taking interest in it. But I still think there's a lot of room just to widen the space for people to participate, and I think something that we could all explore is, linking it to the arts, especially film. So Africa has this big thing, Nollywood, that is going on, and everybody watches them. And I think that countries across the world, I think we all know examples of, people that have used it as disguised propaganda, but in a good way. If we start using movies, start linking to the filmmakers and give them incentives to mainstream these things into I think that's a campaign, and it's something that we can all work towards. In fact, it's something we have started doing in Nigeria to promote integrity values. And I think it's something that needs to go across the continent, and, because because it's a way to reach people, and then they can see how it is without being bored, with numbers and all of that. They can see how, it relates to them, and then, they pick an area of interest, and then they can engage in it. And I think someone asked about audited reports. In Nigeria, we have no access to them at the federal level. So there's a link on the site, but it's constantly broken. I've checked a number of times, and it's always broken. I've written to the Auditor General as well. We have written to the Auditor General with budget and media rights agenda, and we got no response for it. But, when people are undertaking public expenditure reviews, especially for multilateral organizations like the World Bank or DFID and all of that, they have access to those, but it's based on confidentiality. You wouldn't probably give out the information. So you get the contract, you do your you do your PEMFAR reports, all your PFAR, all those things. You do all of it and give it back, but you're not allowed to put it in the public domain. It's information that you have to treat as confidential. So it doesn't help much, and it's something we need to campaign around. And I would be happy to see my Ministry of Finance here, and I would like people who have the clout to bring those people who can make the difference here, so that if we're presenting these things, perhaps they can see some value in it, and they're a little embarrassed, and they go back there and want to make the change to save face. It would be nice to see that happen. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Samba. We'll take 3 comments or questions, and then we'll close. But before we do that, let me just tell you why we at the bank are really excited about this. And I'll tell this in a minute. And I'll tell it in 2 reasons. One is at the institutional level. We have people who work on revenues, some very good people who work on revenues. We have people who work on budget preparation and design of budgets and allocations and all that. We have people who look at expenditures, including a large procurement community. And we have people who work with audit institutions and reporting institutions. These people hardly talk to each other in one institution. So one of the things we are trying to do, talking about linkages, is just, first of all, fix it in-house ourselves so that we are talking and following the money, at least. Secondly, if you look at the country level, that's how we work. We work in a very disaggregated. The people who talk with the auditors at the country level and the parliamentarians at the country level hardly ever talk to each other. One of the things we are saying is that this movement helps us fix some of the problems we have in-house, and that's why we would like to really join one and OKF to see how we can together move this forward.
I just have
yes, Waziri, go ahead.
A question. Thank you very much. I'm Zito Kabwe, parliamentarian from Tanzania. I just want to be sure. You said audit report in Nigeria is not public.
Yeah, well, I have not been, and trust me, I work on public finance, expenditure, even when we're doing PEMFAR. So if I'm doing it, maybe based on consultancy for, and we have these agreements with whoever it is, the World Bank, some of them are still extremely hard to access. But in the public space, you go to the website. So I think it's a fad. The link is there, but it's always broken, So, and even when you write to them, you don't get it. But if, sometimes the institutions can get, who are asking you to do these reviews for them, could help you access it, but it's based on confidentiality. So I wouldn't be able to use it in my mainstream work, to bring about that kind of thing. It would just be for the purpose of the review I'm doing.
In Tanzania, first, the Auditor General report must be public. By law, it must be public. But second, Parliamentary Public Accounts Committee do a public hearing, which is open to media, to civil society organizations to attend, and the responsible officers for several accounts appear before a committee and answer the questions of parliamentary committee. Is this not happening in Nigeria?
We do have a public accounts committee, but I think, what we are most interested in is that citizens can verify the information you've given to them. So if you're here, you're looking at something and you're calling out things selectively, but I cannot look at that report myself, then it creates a problem for me to be able to, and where we're coming from is an area where there's no trust at all in government. So even if you're doing something right, I don't believe you. So it's in your interest, indeed, to even make that information available for me to verify what you're telling me. So we keep hearing these things, seeing numbers, and all of that. But we want to be able, if I want to see it, then I should be able to access it. And that's what we really, really, really want to see happen.
We'll take 2 more. One, who's the second one? We don't have a second? Okay, great. One last question, and then we'll close.
Hi, Bill Anderson from Development Initiatives and the International Aid Transparency Initiative. I want to come back to Martin's question because I think it is a key question and I don't know the answer to it. But maybe we can see the problem in military terminology. We're fighting a war, but we've got two armies. We've got a conventional army and a guerrilla army. The conventional army is made up of governments and national statistics offices and central banks and standards. And tomorrow we have a joined up data session where 5 transparency initiatives are going to sit and try and make tiny little baby steps towards these various standards bodies talking the same language, moving together. The other army are the investigative journalists, the activists, the open data movement, who are grabbing what they need, when they need, and they speak to the people. The fundamental weakness in the conventional army is it is poor on use of data. And I think that is perhaps one bridge in there. The other bridge, I think, is that the guerrilla army must demand from the conventional army access to the data so that it can be used. And I think that there's some kind of synergy there. But still, where the military breaks down is you don't want a Marshal Zhukov leading this army. How do you lead this movement?
Good question. Thank you very much. Can I suggest that we move towards closing? Is that okay? Excellent. Thank you very much. I would like to ask any members of the panel who has just one final thing, who needs to say one final thing as we close?
I need to, one final thing I would encourage you is follow themoney.net. If you are interested in this, in staying, in participating, and getting in touch, go to followthemoney.net. There is further information. There'll be follow-up material from today, and in particular, there'll be information about signing up to the mailing list and the other ways that you can engage going forward. So followthemoney.net is the URL. Please go check it out.
Yes. I think that's it for now. Well, somebody called, I think it was Rufus, who said we need a movement. So you're formally now members of this movement and join us, including through the website. And thank you very much for participating and making sure that we make progress. Thanks a lot.